Juist in deze onzekere tijden is het belangrijk om elkaar te blijven ontmoeten, te informeren en te inspireren over hoe we het morgen slimmer en beter kunnen doen. Welkom bij de livecast van Pakhuis de Zwijger.
Hello and good evening to everyone. This is the Fifth Friday Sisterhood offsite in the Pakhuis de Zwijger for the event Born in Flames Movie Talk. My name is Manjeet Krishna Kaur. I'm the artistic director of the Fifth Friday Sisterhood. And tonight, before we start this event, we need to make a covenant. And that covenant is because every one of us as speakers and as individuals have our own intersectional prism that we look through. And that prism is because of an essay that we're using as a point of entry. And that point of entry is, I'm going to stand up and show you an image. And Gina is going to read it for us. Gina?
In this article,
Louder.
In this article, I want to concentrate on Dutch black feminists and feminists of color and position them as the Dutch intellectuals or organizers and activists who, as a movement and as individuals, have been the key to developing an intersectional theory and praxis.
This essay can be found in the Adria Library for Feminism and Gender Studies. And as you can see from the second image, the covenant suggests that we have been invisible for way too long, except for the women at the front line. And the women at the front line are from my generation, because the film that we are speaking about tonight was made in 1983. So, this is my space. I created this event. And, oops, I'm moving out of shot. And I have the right to make sure that everyone respects the fact that it is an intersectional space, and we all have the right. And the evidence that I'm going to prove my own intersectionality is this. I'm going to show you a picture of where I originate from. I was born in 1959 in a fundamental Sikh culture under a veil, and I was married off at the age of 16. This image is of my dad. I'm going to stand up. The man in white is my father. And this is a publicity shot by a local newspaper. And it only shows the men, because on the other side of the room are the women. And we're not allowed to show the women. This is 1969. This is 1979. And it's like a Margaret Atwood from her book, Handmaid's Tale. All the women on this side are the breeders. And all the girls at the front are waiting for their marriages to be arranged. And all the other women on the left-hand side are the widows in pastel colours. This little girl is my youngest daughter. This little girl is my eldest daughter. And they are in rainbow-coloured jumpers. I'm being handed a mic, sorry. And this is my sister in purple. And here am I in the middle, holding the ritual tray. And this is my brother, whose wedding we are attending. Because I was still naive in 1979. Not long after this photo was taken in April, by September, the violence to me and my children became so extreme that I ran away in the middle of the night and went into a Blythe from a Lifehouse, a women's shelter. And a year later, living in squats with activists, artists, and feminists, I became radicalized by democracy.
Woo!
And by 1981, I was learning to make an income. The Women's Aid Shelter employed me to cook food for all their events, and this is the very first cheque for £5 and 20 pence. And if you look in the top corner there, you see the date 1981. But that's enough about me for now. I will show more evidence later of why intersectionality matters. Now I would like to introduce you to our panelists, because their intersectionality and the great privilege that they've given me to have them here is just as important to discuss this movie. Put this microphone down. So, first and foremost, one of my dearest and oldest friends, Julie Phillips. Hello, Julie.
Hello, Krishna.
So, how do you feel about being on a live stage after months of lockdown?
Unprepared, but that's par for the course. This is one of my possibly all-time favorite movies, and you introduced me to it, for which I'm forever grateful.
And next to you, we have Gina Lafore.
Yeah.
Hi, Gina. How you doing?
I'm good. Also feeling quite unprepared. Just came from work before this. Quite busy in the head, but good.
And last but not least, we have Shishani. How do you say your last name? Because I'm always looking at that X at the end.
I know, it's more complicated than it actually, it looks more complicated than it is. Franks.
Franks.
Yeah.
Shishani Franks.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here, connect with people outside of my household, and talk about something amazing. So I'm excited.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So we're going to start with a little round of each panellist telling us about their intersectionality. So, Julie, here's your 5 minutes. Go for it.
Came here to talk about mice. Because my favorite line from this movie is when Flo Kennedy, and in real life, she's the person who came up with the slogan, "A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle." But she was also an impressive feminist lawyer, and she's the mastermind behind this revolution. And she says, you know what I always say, what would you rather see come through the door? One lion, unified, or 500 mice? You know, 500 mice can do a lot of damage. And Krishna asked me to talk a little bit about how I see myself in this movie. Who am I in this movie? And, you know, at one time, maybe I would have thought I have to be one of the heroes. But really, I'm a mouse. I'm one of the 500 mice. I am a mouse in a pattern of mice. I'm a mouse in a multitude of mice. And mice get things done, and patterns make things happen. In the terms of emergent strategy by the Black feminist activist Adrienne Marie Brown, mice are emergent. Their actions are linked to the actions of other mice. They join together in intersectional patterns of community and persistence. They adapt, they're resilient, they're resourceful, they chew on stuff. Mm-hmm. They're also hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings who created the Earth in order to find out the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Because let's not forget, we're in the realm of science fiction. And that's where we need to be. Because as Brown says, science fiction is a way to practice the future together. Together, not alone. When I volunteer for the Women's March, I'm a mouse. When I show up for Black lives, for Black, queer, and trans lives, standing on the Museumsplein, holding up a sign, I'm a mouse. When I help an American register to vote, I'm a mouse. One such act is nothing. Many such acts, that's everything. If 500 mice can disrupt what's there, they can also create what's not there. Brown asks, what are the ideas that can liberate all of us? The more people that collaborate on that ideation, the more people will be served by the resulting worlds. I'm there for the collaboration of the mice. And you know, lately, the last couple weeks, and before that, I've been checking the news. I get up every morning, I say, is he still there? Is that fog that settled over America ever going to lift? And a couple days ago, I woke up and I just thought, no, it's there. It's the new weather. It's what we have to get used to. I'm going to learn this fog of untruth is the new climate. I have to learn to live with it. And I can probably learn a lot about that from other people, the people who've always been lied to about their freedom. So, how do you find your way in a fog? You focus on critical connections. You help each other survive and thrive. Intersectionality puts you at a crossroads. You can move toward each other. You can offer assistance. You can check your privilege. You can look for patterns for the many, for the mice, the ones who are, as Audre Lorde said, seeking a now that can breed futures. Seeds of the future. You may not know where you're heading, but when you get there, be ready to plant yourself and grow. Roads are the future. Colson Whitehead writes that the Underground Railroad, the escape route from white supremacy, is built at the same time that it's being used by the people who travel through it and the allies who maintain the rails. Who are you after you finish something this magnificent, he asks. In constructing it, you have also journeyed through it to the other side. Somebody once asked the science fiction writer Ursula K. Le Guin what she would do to save the world. She answered that since she didn't actually have that kind of superpower, she would go on doing what she'd always done. She would write novels and worry. I think that's the mouse way. Do your work and worry and survive. And by doing those things, save the world. Water wears down mountains. Mice waylay the plans of men. Le Guin preferred the way of water. She believed in patience, in flowing around obstacles. That's one way. I'm more a mouse person, chewing up important documents, nesting in the cabinets, doing my little bit to save the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Wow, loved it.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. Gina, would you like to take over the microphone?
Yeah, sure. So I didn't prepare a story like Julie, but I did think about it a lot because you, Krishna, you asked me, who am I? And to be honest, it's the most difficult question someone ever asked me. So I've been thinking, who am I? I'm the daughter of a mother born in the 80s, Bandung, Java. I'm the daughter of a father born in the Netherlands with Surinamese roots and born within the hunger winter, as we say. They thought I would be a child of the world because I have my Indonesian, my Chinese, my Surinamese, and my Dutch roots. And sometimes I feel like it. I go to Brazil and people there ask me for the way. They speak in Brazilian with me, in Portuguese, or how you call it. Or I go to many different places, or even in Amsterdam, in the West where I lived and used to work. a lot of people ask me, Miss, are you Moroccan? And I tell them, yeah, well, I'm a lot, but I'm not that. But also, at the same time, when I speak with people that are Surinamese or Dutch or Indonesian or Chinese, sometimes they relate with me and they can see that I'm one of theirs. And oftentimes they do not at all. Or they ask me, what do you eat? What do you cook?
Important question.
Yeah, it is. It is. But, you know, this is just a part of me. I was raised in Amsterdam, outside. I would say I'm privileged, yet I'm not. I'm a woman of color, but I'm a human. I don't know. You're
also a journalist. You're also very active with the voting forum and trying to activate people to vote, people like us who tend not to.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I tend to scream, you know, I tend to fight, but also I listen, and I'm curious. As a journalist, I'm mostly listening, and I'm learning that now. I have my strong ideals, but at the same time, my opponents, to say, I study them, I talk with them, I listen to them with the same passion and the same care that I have for my activism. So it's a mix of things.
You and I took part in an art installation research in the Tropen Institute, where we were confronted by objects stolen through colonial powers and reinvented our cultures for us to consume.
Yeah.
And we were both very emotional during that particular time.
Yeah, I remember.
And afterwards, I remember having a conversation with you about what it would mean if these objects were ever returned. Because people like us cannot return anywhere. We're so mixed, we have no place.
Yeah, well, I guess that's my story, right?
So we're part of the revolution. We're going to claim bits of Amsterdam. This is our space now, right?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Thank you so much, Gina. And our next panelist is a musicologist and an activist, and I just love her music. And she's graced the floors and stage of Fifth Friday Before, Shashani Franks.
Thank you. Well, I'll never look at mice the same way after this story. And I could really relate to the question, what do you eat?
Yeah.
Because I was in a taxi on my way from somewhere, and the taxi driver, he was Surinamese, and he asked, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? And then I said, stampot, which is a super Dutch dish. And he was so shocked. He was like, no, you're not making stampot. And I was like, yeah, I really enjoy it. And then I do this and this and this. And he was just shocked, I think, because I'm a person of color. And he wouldn't expect me, with whatever roots I have, to actually prepare that dish. But I enjoyed that moment of interaction. And I saw it also as a way of how I identify, like most of us at the table, like somebody from many places. So I was born in Namibia when it was still part of South Africa. Belgian dad, Namibian mom. They got together still during apartheid. So I, as a mixed person, was also kind of illegal to exist. Then we came to the Netherlands, then I grew up here, and I've always kind of fell between the cracks. And as a young person, that was pretty hard, you know, because you're not black, you're not white, you're not this, you're not that. Also with now Transgender Awareness Week, everybody asked, are you a girl or a boy? You know, so I had a lot of questions coming at me. And now I'm really happy, you know, like that I was kind of between those cracks, because I learned to look and live differently. And that's something that I hope many people could have, to just have, to be able to step out of comfort zones and try to understand somebody who's so different from you. Because it's really easy in our day and age to have your Facebook friends and not see all the horrible news that other people are sharing. But then, the real world is full of all this opposition and all these differences and all these things that we're struggling against, from an intersectionality, an intersectional perspective. So, I don't know, like seeing this movie, Born in Flames, reading the article of Nancy Jouwe, I just felt a lot of recognition, foregrounding women of color, queer people kind of being the heroes in a movie, and not like a side thing or a problem or dramatic end. Of course, in the movie, there's a dramatic end, but there was also a lot of, leadership and heroism. And that's something that I was really happy to see. And I felt so much connection with, and also the musicians in the movie, the bands. And I was like, whoa, that was 83. And, like here you are doing exactly the same thing in 2020. And then you wonder, okay, a lot has happened, but still we're dealing with the same thing. So it was just really, really interesting to see how, this struggle has been going on for so long and has had many forms, but some things are still, still the same in a way. So I started a band with musicians that are women. And in 2020, that's still a thing. It's still a thing. And seeing that movie, I was like, why don't I know this band? Why aren't bands that have musicians who are women, why aren't they as famous as their male counterparts? If you say name 5 bands, you'll name 5 bands, and I'm sure they're all only made of men. So I don't know, with my work and in my life, I just try to create what I also miss, what I don't see around me. I try to create. Namibia is not a country that many people know about. I grew up trying to find music and trying to find history. And this was still before internet, so it was really hard to kind of access music without YouTube. So the only way was to wait for a cassette tape or whatever to reach you. And even studying musicology was a way to dive into getting to know more about traditional music from Namibia, and also to write something about modern contemporary music from Namibia, because it wasn't there yet. So in that way, I just felt a lot of recognition with the film and the article, and I was just excited to be here and to hear more about everybody else.
We're going to get an opportunity to actually hear your music in a moment. So while you step over and get yourself ready, Shani,
all right,
I'm going to add to my story again. Because obviously, first of all, Born in Flames is from 1983. And first and foremost, I have to make an apology. Because when we put up the film yesterday for a couple of hours, due to a copyright glitch, people couldn't access it. We fixed it within a couple of hours, which means that apologies to the filmmaker, because there's a minute and a half of muted sound to take that piece of music out. We didn't want to mess with the original content. Secondly, apologies to everyone who tried to access it, because it will be available for a couple of more hours after this live cast. And thirdly, to Jimi Hendrix, whose music was absolutely apt for the scene that it was removed from, but it wasn't heard. When this movie was being made, I'm going to stand up and show you a couple more images, and for that, I will need my microphone. Across in America, oh, my clicker isn't working. There was an amazing young student following the same track that Adelaide Norris was travelling, called Kimberly Crenshaw, who actually 30 years later gave us the word intersectionality. This image is of her at the law faculty in Amsterdam, where she came and visited us last year. And in Amsterdam, we had our own version in the wonderful Gloria Wekker, who gave us, in her writings, the book White Innocence, from which intersectionality was given a platform legally to be able to affect policy and mandate on legislation. And during that period of time, in those early 80s, I joined an organisation called ITFA, which is the International Documentary Film Festival, which happens in November every single year and has done for the last 30 years. And there I met even more women of power and courage, like Sonja Barend. And she and I helped develop the moderators department in ITFA. And 2 years ago, I retired because now it's time for the younger generation. And part of that younger generation, of course, are sitting at our table. So now I would like to introduce you to Shishani Franks and her wonderful musicology music. Thank you.
Yes. So this song relates to the article that we've read, because in the article, Nancy Yao is talking about how women of color are silenced. And that's something that we do actively. Also, not remembering certain people and certain people's history is something that actively happens. We don't just forget, we forget to remember them. And this is something that we keep doing. And at some point earlier this year, in May, I hit a boiling point, and I had to do something with that energy, and that's where the song comes from, Forget to Remember. Freedom for a few, maybe if they look like you. RMS, black and brown lives matter in the US. Gaza and Syria, still slavery in Libya. The Kurds, the Uyghurs in China, Myanmar and Nepal. What about Bosnia? What about Iraq, Iran? Freedom for a few, maybe if they look like you. Sudan, it's like the whole world forgets Africans. Apartheid in our governments, indigenous people not relevant. What about the sun, the Aboriginals headed on now? My First Nations, Amazonians, Polynesians, Indonesia. Free West Papua, free Palestina. I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? There's a war on women every day. 140 women slain daily by their partners and family, 'cause we're still seen as property. And my queer and trans community, it's a war zone chronically. You see, Yemen is still hungry. Kids still in the streets over kids still in the streets over there in Greece. I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? And oh, we forget to remember it's all of us. We forget to remember it's all of us. We forget to remember. keep on forgetting.
Woo! Thank you. While Shishani is returning to her place and putting away her instruments, I'm going to stand up again and take the microphone and check where in the images I am. Whilst Born in Flames was being made, I needed to work for a living. And unfortunately, ITFA and all my activism wasn't bringing in any money because the Dutch saw me as an immigrant and my main skill was cooking.
Important.
Or cleaning. Or childcare. At the sidelines, I began to take part in groups that were active in the labour movement. And eventually, they invited me to give some lectures. And with their support, off I went across Europe with a little gang of women of colour trying to affect the policies in the European laws to give us a more stable background. Now, we thought those changes would help. We didn't know that the EU was about to amalgamate and throw people like us even under a bigger bus. And so I went back to cooking and working with the social security system in the Netherlands to help women in microcredit and finance who were referred to me through social services to start their own businesses. This is one of the braver ones who doesn't mind being on a photograph, where we actually cooked our food and sold it to people at festivals and at cultural centres. But their business eventually meant that they could go to people's homes for parties, 18 birthdays, engagements. And although most of them cannot be in photographs because it's not their cultural status, this is the very first time they made a profit. And there it is. And they had enough money left over from the ingredients, and they bought a piece of equipment, and they wrote down their recipes with the help of my stagiaire, my trainees in Dutch, and sold those along with the actual food. And there are their hands to prove that it's really them. So still, after 25 years, I was stuck inside the cultural mindset of the Dutch on what I'm allowed to do. And meanwhile, the little girl in the rainbow jumpers were growing up fast, moving out of the house, and joining organisations that when I was working with them used to be grassroots, but that now had a seat at the table. So let's talk about why we're here. Critical race theory. First of all, considering the essay and the film that we've all watched, is there a need for critical race theory in the Netherlands? Are there enough groups for us to reach out to form such a movement? What do you think, Shishani?
Absolutely, of course we need it. I mean, we're dealing with racism on a daily basis, but there are many groups working, whether it's individual artists, whether it's organized groups, working towards creating awareness. If you think of, for example, the Black Archives, making knowledge accessible for people to understand what's going on. There are many things that I could mention. So I think we're building on top of the work of people that have been doing it for decades already. But there's still a problem, yes. So yes, we still need it because so much has to be done. And when we're talking about gender, then you have that aspect, but then being women of color from different backgrounds, also dealing with different cultural expectations, not being seen as, one of this community, of this country. I mean, people with a migrant status not getting the chances that they deserve in this country if you come from another country. For example, like my mother, a Namibian woman that came here to work. She was, at the time, a nurse, and that people would ask her stupid questions like, this is a needle. You know how this works? And she'd been doing this for years. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we can laugh about it now, but it was horrible. Like I saw a very powerful woman who really was somebody in her country kind of wither away like a little flower. And I saw my dad going from powerful doctor in Namibia to powerful doctor in the Netherlands. And I saw my mom going from powerful nurse in Namibia going to kind of worthless nurse in the Netherlands. And I think so many people with this migrant background experience this. People don't get the chances that they deserve. Our qualities, our degrees are not seen. You're not, you're not giving a chance to fully blossom in this place. It's like our people first. So in that sense, like that has definitely done something with me as a child, like just seeing this and not understanding what it was, but then have people
lesser value.
Yeah.
You value yourself in a lesser way because you're having to prove.
Well, yes and no. The thing is, like, I saw how people treated my mother and how they talked about my mother because she talked with a different accent, which is Afrikaans, because the Dutch were in South Africa and also Namibia. Yeah. So that's why, like, it's a funny accent, but she still spoke the language. She could still do her work. She was, but people would just look at her or any migrant as somebody who's a little bit stupid or who doesn't really understand. So it was more the pain of seeing how people were devaluing her and my inability to do something at that moment because I was a kid. I was 5 years old. So I became, I took up this role of kind of translating for my mother or trying to, like cover up like, no.
Yeah.
So.
No, I remember distinctly that my mother was diabetic and that often gave her epilepsy. Mm. And because she didn't speak the language, by the age of 10, I was having to sit in medical environments, hospitals.
And explain.
And I also used it a bit because they were forcing us to drink milk and Asians are lactose intolerant at school. And so when they went to sign my brother up at school, they had to speak to the head of the school. And they would speak in Punjabi and I would say, yes, she's saying it's against our religion to drink milk. Mm-hmm. So, you also start shaping your world.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. But Julie, as someone who's considered visibly white and privileged and published, you live in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And I saw your daughter help forge forward with All Lives Matter. During the shootings in the schools in America and started
the March for Our Lives.
The March for Our Lives. And there again, the fusion between all the subgroups of young people turned up. Yeah. And they all held banners together because we're not just as people of colour trying to bring critical race theory to the fore, but we have compatriots, we have people within the Western white communities who are also looking at the same issues. So you've raised 2 young teenage children in this country.
Trying not to be completely in the way.
But obviously it's challenging us all, especially being an American after George Floyd. In the movie, Adelaide Norris is martyrized because she's murdered in a prison cell. Mm-hmm. And finally, the white feminists decide, oh, it's true. We need to pick a side. Mm-hmm. This is the side that we're going to pick. Is that a challenge for you personally? Do you have to choose a side?
It's not so much choosing a side as awareness, as reawareness, as keeping open your awareness, as trying not to be... If you don't do anything, it sort of the naturalness of being a white person in a white environment kind of draws you back in. It feels sort of like sometimes like I'm standing underneath the only street light and out there is darkness. And it's much safer underneath the street light. And of course, that's not how the world is, and it's not how it is out there. And every time I go out, I leave my street light, I go out there, I'm like, oh, this is the actual world, and I'm just pretending like it's dark and this is the only street light. But you have to, it draws you back in, it pulls you in, you forget, and then you have to go out again and again and again.
But your work with Democrats abroad...
I mean, is that sort of how white privilege looks from the outside?
Well,
does that make any sense?
It's not so much white privilege, but the point being is that during your activism with Democrats abroad and during the election process of helping people get their votes, no matter who they were or where they were from, even if they were voting Republican, it was just vote now. And now we're going to have the runoffs in Georgia, which I know you're very passionate about and very active, and to get the Senate into a democratic formula. We don't have those processes here in the Netherlands. No. There's a voting elite that controls it, and very few of us have any power over that. So sharing your knowledge of how to actually do that kind of activism is something that I feel can be shared, because we need to be active on all fronts, not just within the academic world. Because Gina has been active in that particular side of things, getting people of colour to vote and actually getting out there as a journalist and bringing the subjects to people in a serious frame is also critical race theory to some degree. Maybe not in a teaching session, but definitely as an activity.
Yeah, well, listening to all of you, I was just thinking, I've had this conversation not too long ago with my parents in the kitchen, quite typical. And we were talking because my father used to be a Black Panther affiliate in the Netherlands, and my mom used to read books from activists from Indonesia. And the strange thing about it is that they didn't really talk to me about it. I found out by myself, by coincidence, and by doing the activist work that I used to do, that my father, for example, used to be an activist. We spoke about it, he didn't tell us this, but he did say, he make references and stuff. But what they did always tell us is to think critically. And the interesting thing is that the moment that I started to become more aware about my surroundings and started to become more active within activism, they would sometimes hush me. The moment that I spoke about whiteness, and that my mom would always tell me, Gina, but don't you remember all the people that used to work in our office space, because they now together have an architectural bureau. I grew up in these office spaces and with all my dad's employees, and a lot of them were white. And they are good friends of my parents. But since, I think what happened with them is they kind of had the most critical people around them, all kinds of people, of different shades or backgrounds, that my worldview and theirs at that moment was not too much, even though it is a reality, surrounded or formed around race. So it was always more about having to think critically, but then the race element of our experiences, that became something within me that I became more aware of throughout the years. But for me, having had the experiences that I have in activism, I think this is kind of what I'm growing more towards too. For whatever your background, your gender, your sexual preference, your ability, whatever it is, your class, that you always want to learn and grow and think critically and just be aware about the surroundings that you live in, the people that you have around you, whatever job or occupation or activity it is that you're doing.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate now. Just imagine we have a dream scenario.
Yeah, because it is kind of...
So we're going to create a movement. Mm-hmm. How many Dutch groups can we name that could be part of that movement? I heard the words Black Archives.
Black Archives, yeah.
How many more are there? There's Black Renaissance.
Yes. I'm saying now that I'm not blurting them out, but they're there.
There's Against Zwarte Piet.
Yeah.
There's Black Queer and Trans Resistance.
There's Black Queer and Trans Resistance.
Black Lives Matter in the Netherlands.
There's Black Lives Matter in the Netherlands. There's Comité 21, who have been at the forefront since 1985.
Yeah.
Because obviously the death of George Floyd was not just unique to the United States of America. It happens here quite regularly.
Yeah.
And as I've shown the hands of all the invisible women that I work with, who have got more in common with me because I fought for education. I learnt to read and write from my children as they went through the schooling process. So in the beginning, it was true to say that for some reason, I was only able to cook or take care of children. It was an extension of who I was, and to learn to earn an income from it. Is there any radical unemployment or employment unions that we could name?
Not that I can mention now.
That's much more difficult, I would say.
Yeah.
We did have an occupation of the Machterhaus by the University of Colour 5 years ago. And when I was working with those individuals, it was the same people, Gloria Wecker, Patricia Kirstenhout, Mercedes Swanenberg. It was always the same women of our generation still pushing, because that's how we got there, by occupation. But the divide and rule of the state ability now means that we have a chief diversity officer in the university who isn't actually that diverse herself, because she's actually quite a privileged white woman. But all the staff really are of colour. They are diverse in their gender and sexual orientation. And I'm going to stand up and show some more photos of my own little world. We have people like this. Because obviously my background and passion, like Julie, is science fiction. So here are the Dungeons and Drag Queens. And one of those is my trans femme to male godchild, Matthew, who is now in development with NTR to make a program called Self-Made Man, which will be piloted on television next year and start shooting next month. And the reason that I'm doing all this, of course, is because my grandchildren are growing up in a world where we desperately need this. We desperately need critical race theory to become part of legislative policy, legislative insight, affect mandates within universities as well as institutions, as well as the law courts, to protect the future. So my last question to everyone before we do the countdown into the thank yous is, can we think of any ideas on how to do that? You're all going to get 2 minutes. Julie, what do you think? Can we do that? How can we make this come about?
I'm so curious how, just to start with the not forgetting what you were, and your parents having not kind of, What do you think? You're talking about godchildren, and you're talking about your parents and what you got and didn't get from them. What's the line of transmission? How do you get from the older generation to the younger? I'm writing about Bernardine Evaristo right now, and she said she wrote Girl, Woman, Other because there were so many amazing feminist women of color young on social media, and she was like, we were there too. Mm-hmm. I need to write this history down. I lived this history. You know, she's the same age as you. She's like, I was there. We did this. We weren't maybe as good at it quite as you, but, you know, we were paving the way. And how do you have to write it down? Do you have to speak it? Do you have to teach it? What do you do?
Shishani.
I think you research. You know, the people doing research, because not everybody by nature will go out and do research.
Black archives is really important.
Yes, so people need to research. Then we need this, this information needs to be spread, education. You know, like we need to know who is doing what, and we need to be honest about history, you know, and that's not what happens in schools. So that's already another thing. Wit aan Zet is an organization also that works on integrating the colonial history within the Dutch school system. So that's one thing, and they're doing the work. Another thing now, I think, which is very important and a beautiful movement, is that there are new media channels being opened. So there's TV channel Omroep Zwart and Omroep X, which is, you know, run by people of color, diverse, you know, and that also forms your world. I mean, we're on social media, we're on TV most of the time. So you need channels that represent you and share those stories. So whoever is not part of them yet, become a member. Yeah. Omroep Zwart, Omroep X. Because then we can start creating our own stories and not have them narrated and filled in by other channels. So most people don't do research unless it's necessary. So what we need is mainstream media basically sharing true histories and creating and having space for people to tell their own stories in their own terms, in our own ways, you know, and not be, you know, not have like a seat at the table, but to create our own tables. And that is what's happening now. That's the beautiful thing of this era. I mean, when we grew up, I think the whole race thing was not as strong as now. The past 10, 15 years is when I became aware of race, you know, because I grew up with everybody around me and it wasn't a black and white thing. But because the movement became stronger and more vocal, you know, this polarization is happening. But that's only because we're also rising in our voices. So that's, I think, a cause and effect thing.
And I think that has a lot to do with critical race theory, because the more you have a language to talk about it, the more you do talk about it, and the more you talk about it,
and the more resistance.
Back to our experience in the Tropen Institute. Do you think that institutions need to play a bigger role?
Definitely. But I don't know if I per se want to go back there, but I would say I got real excited when you named Omroep X and Omroep Zwart. I'm super excited about that, seeing that happening right now. And I would say the same for musea, for schools, for, you know, institutions. Yeah. I think, for example, when I look at my own youth, I'm happy the way my parents raised me, and I think for parents, especially for kids of color or whatever type of kids, it's not unto them per se to teach their children, you know, all about critical race theory or, you know, how to make movements. I think this, you know, critical race theory should be in all institutions, and critical theory also, you know, with all the intersections that are part of that, should be on television, on radio, in schools and everywhere. So it should be the normal, you know. And I think that is the key to.
And also movements right now are different than they were. So now being able to create your own TV channels, this is the real revolution. Yeah, it's like we had the protest on the streets and people gathering and just physically being together. But that is really where the revolution is, because we're all on social media, we're all watching TV, we're all on our telephones. If you then have channels that represent you and you can see yourself and you can learn about your history in a truthful way, that, like with that knowledge, your critical thinking will also expand. So
yeah, and that's what
where it
Born
is
in
now.
Flame said. It's like,
And that
get the language,
get the language.
and get on TV, get on...
Exactly. Well, now we're on
get the
TV.
channel. Yeah.
Yeah, we're coming to our thank yous now, which brings us back to the movie. Born in Flames is a story of Adelaide Norris, a young student with a fluid gender issue as well as a need. Born as one of 8 children to a single mother, she's also the breadwinner and fighting on so many fronts that in the end she becomes radicalised and ends up going to training camps in the Middle East to start weaponizing herself to bring back to forge a movement. And once she returns, she's taken up by the police, by the immigrations, and dies in a prison cell, martyring then the revolution builds up around her, where all the fraction groups form a platform in her name. The Fifth Friday Sisterhood must give a disclaimer that we do not really endorse terrorism or violence. But we have new weapons in the 21st century. We have these machines. We have, as our panelists have said, the ability to broadcast, to affect and disrupt institutions that do not play the game and actually replace them with substitutes that can reach a much wider audience. So first and foremost, my heartfelt thanks to Lizzie Borden, with whom I spoke to a couple of days, for making this wonderful piece of content to allow me to make a discussion panel around it. I would also like to wish to thank the panelists who have given up their time and energy to take part in my mad ravings. I would also like to thank the Pakhuis de Zwijgen, who during this terrifying period of lockdown have really worked very hard to keep our voices going. So at the end of this programme, you will see a little donation. You can put in 2 cents, 5 cents, but anything to help pay for all this stuff that we are getting no money for anymore. And lastly, the Fifth Friday team, to Petra, to Tori, to Sope, to Hannah. Thank you for always supporting me and following me through these mad journeys that I create, because actually I have no idea what I'm doing. So if you need to blame anyone, the buck stops with me. If you have any comments or have any ideas, go to our Fifth Friday page, stick them on there, and we will take them up. After this programme is finished, on the Fifth Friday page, we will put the website for Lizzie Borden. The film will be up for a couple of hours after this live cast. If you get the opportunity, please see it. It is dynamite. There isn't a type of human that needs to be visible that isn't in this movie. And considering how long ago it was made, the last shot will chill your spine. I would like to end this programme by saying I'm going to go around the table and ask you for one sentence as a goodbye. Julie, one sentence.
Oh, thank you, Krishna. Just thanks for how long? 30, almost 28 years of friendship.
Thank you. Gina.
Thank you as well to, I think, reuniting us, because we haven't seen each other in a long time. It was nice meeting you. So thanks for a lovely evening.
Same thing. Thanks, everybody. Let's all be mouses. Mice.
Yeah,
let's get out there. Become a member of these new TV stations. Omroep X, Omroep Zwart. I should be paid for this, but I'm not. But do become a member, because this is how we're disrupting and how the little mice.
You don't have to do everything. You just have to do the work.
Well, this is part of that work.
This is part of that work.
Yeah, and let's keep connecting in whatever way that is possible.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. The Bakhauz has several more items every single day, so please do keep tuned in. Thank you to our sponsors, Atria, the Gender Feminist Library, who've been so kind in supporting me with all the documentation. And again, please donate to the Bakhauz des Zwijgers. Thank you very much.